I wasn't supposed to be noticed. Not in houses like this, where the walls whispered money and the air always smelled faintly of imported candles and restraint. I was just a housekeeper, a ghost in comfortable shoes, carrying a caddy of lemon-scented polish and folded towels. My name is Emily Torres, 27, single, and quietly trying to rebuild a life that had been swept off a cliff 2 years earlier by a man who once told me love should hurt to be real. I believed him, until the bruises started to feel permanent, not just on my skin but in the quiet places of my mind. So I left. I packed a duffel bag, walked out of the apartment we shared, and never looked back. No alimony, no confrontation. Just freedom, barely affordable and awkwardly earned. That's how I ended up at the Whitmore's mansion on Sycamore Hill. The first time I saw the place, I hesitated at the gate. The intercom crackled, and a crisp female voice said, "You're late." I wasn't, but I apologized anyway. Claire Whitmore was tall, sleek, and studied. She greeted me at the door like I was a delivery package, expected but unimpressive. She wore a cashmere wrap and no shoes, and her gaze flitted over me with the efficiency of someone who appraises people for their utility. She showed me the rooms, gave instructions, and never once asked a question about me. The house was cavernous. Marble floors, white walls, art that looked expensive and slightly angry. No photographs. No warmth. It was the kind of home that made you lower your voice even when no one was around. Everything gleamed, but nothing felt alive. Daniel Whitmore, her husband, didn't make an appearance that first day. I was told he worked late and preferred not to be disturbed. His study was off-limits. His schedule was unpredictable. And most importantly, he doesn't talk much. For the first few weeks, I barely saw him. I'd hear the front door unlock around midnight, followed by the soft clink of a glass in the kitchen. By morning, he was gone again, like a shadow too disciplined to leave footprints. But I noticed things. Coffee rings on the mahogany desk, ties discarded on chairbacks, the scent of cologne lingering in hallways. Subtle signs of a man who lived in silence. Claire, on the other hand, was thunderously present. Every Thursday, she hosted brunches for her curated circle of wealthy wives, blonde, bored, and brutal in their gossip. I was always within earshot, though they barely registered my existence. "You know what Daniel said last night?" Claire would begin, sipping mimosa. "Nothing. Not one word. I think he's turning into a statue." Polite laughter. A chorus of pity dressed as concern. "He's lucky I haven't traded him in for a younger model." More laughter. More bubbles in tall, crystal flutes. That was the first layer I peeled back. Claire Whitmore, beautiful and bitter, lived in a marriage that had fossilized. She weaponized sarcasm and wore perfection like armor, but her smiles never reached her eyes. One rainy afternoon, about a month into the job, I lingered longer than usual while dusting the shelves in Daniel's study. The door had been left open. The room was dim, the air earthy with the scent of old books and worn leather. I trailed my fingers along the spines of law texts and classic novels, all meticulously arranged. It was the first room in the house that felt personal. "You can go in if you'd like," a voice said behind me. I jumped, my heart thudding as I turned to see Daniel leaning against the doorway. I wasn't going to touch anything," I stammered. He gave a small, tired smile. "It's all right. You're probably the only person in this house who still notices the books." His voice was deeper than I imagined, calm, with a gravelly edge that suggested too many late nights and too little rest. "I'm sorry," I said, retreating slightly. "You don't need to be," he replied, stepping into the room. He moved slowly, as if weighed down. "Emily, right?" I nodded. The fact that he knew my name startled me. He sat in the leather armchair near the window and picked up a book without opening it. Silence stretched between us, thick but not uncomfortable. For the first time, I saw him clearly, not the elusive ghost of the household, but a man carrying an invisible burden. He didn't look at me but spoke quietly. "Do you ever feel like you're just existing in someone else's life?" The question hung in the air like mist. "Yes," I said softly. "More than I'd like to admit." He glanced at me then, and in that moment, something unspoken passed between us. Recognition. The kind that didn't need words or history. Just pain, quietly mirrored. That evening, I walked home slower than usual, the rhythm of my footsteps mismatched with the thoughts in my head. I didn't know what that moment had meant. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. You should quit, my best friend Sophia said later that week over coffee. I blinked. Why? Because you're starting to sound invested. And we both know what happens when you get too close. I'm just cleaning their house off. Are you? She asked, raising an eyebrow. I didn't answer, but I thought about it often. About Daniel's question. About Claire's disdain. About the strange sense of familiarity I felt whenever I stepped into that cold, silent mansion. There was a heaviness in that house that no vacuum could lift. Something broken, hidden in plain sight. And though I tried to stay detached, something inside me kept reaching, curious, cautious, compelled. It was a mistake. But like all mistakes, I wouldn't recognize it until much later. At the time, I only knew this. I was just a housekeeper. Until that night. The storm started just after sunset. It rolled in over the hills with a low growl, dragging dark clouds behind it like an omen. I stood by the kitchen window, watching the trees sway under the pressure of rising wind. The rain hadn't begun yet, but the silence before it felt electric. Claire had left hours earlier, off to a weekend charity gala in Charleston. Her suitcase wheels had whispered across the marble like they were trying not to wake a sleeping house. She hadn't said goodbye. She'd simply instructed me to lock up and reminded me that Daniel won't need anything, as usual. But he was home. Upstairs, somewhere in his study. A sliver of light seeped out from under the door. The rest of the house lay in shadow. I moved through the rooms with my usual rhythm, drapes drawn, pillows fluffed, surfaces wiped. But the house felt different that night. Lighter somehow. Emptier in a way that didn't feel cold. I told myself it was just the absence of her voice. Around 9 p.m., the storm broke. It came suddenly, rain hammering against the windows, thunder cracking like a whip. The lights flickered once, then again. I paused in the hallway, the air around me tightening with the weight of the storm. A beat later, everything went dark. The silence was immediate and full. Then a voice, low, measured, from down the hall. Emily. I turned, heart thudding. Daniel stood at the end of the hallway, framed by the dim emergency light from his study. The generator will kick in soon, he said. But until then, would you mind joining me? I could use the company. I hesitated. Not because I was afraid, but because the sound of my name in his voice always felt like something I wasn't supposed to hear. I'll make tea, I offered, because it gave my hand something to do. A few minutes later, I entered the study with 2 steaming mugs. He was seated in the leather chair again, wearing a gray sweater and slacks, his glasses perched on the edge of his nose as he flipped through a book he clearly wasn't reading. I handed him the mug. He accepted it with a quiet thanks and a nod, then gestured to the seat across from him. I always thought storms were louder in big houses, he said after a moment, the mug warming his hands. I smiled faintly. They have more space to echo. He chuckled softly. That's a good line. You right? Not since college, I said. Too many real-life messes to sort through. He looked at me then, really looked. You seem young to be carrying messes. I shrugged. Some people get early access. He nodded slowly, eyes unreadable. I know what that feels like. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was the kind of silence that only happened when 2 people had run out of small talk and were teetering on the edge of something real. I've never asked, how did you end up here? He asked, voice gentle. Needed a job, I replied. Didn't want to talk to people too much. Cleaning houses seemed safe. Is it safer than loving the wrong person? He didn't flinch, but his jaw tightened ever so slightly. He turned his gaze to the rain racing down the window like it was trying to escape something. I married Claire because it made sense, he said after a pause. At the time, everything about her life was exactly what mine needed. Connections. Clean lines. No chaos. And now, I asked quietly. He exhaled through his nose. Now, I spend most days convincing myself that I'm not invisible, and most nights wondering when I became a stranger in my own home. The words were raw, stripped of the suit and tie polish. For a second, I didn't know how to respond. So, I didn't. I just sat with him in that shared ache, the space between us thick with years we hadn't lived together, but somehow understood. The wind howled outside, battering the windows. My mug was half empty. So was my sense of detachment. I see you, I said finally. His eyes met mine, and for a moment, something in his expression cracked. Not broken, but softened. And that softness reached me in ways I hadn't expected. You shouldn't, he said, almost a whisper. Not like this. I stood, needing air, needing movement. I should finish up the laundry. He reached out as I turned to go, just his fingers grazing mine. The contact stopped me cold. He didn't pull me closer. Didn't speak. Just kept his hand where it was, light but unmistakable. A question, not a demand. I should have pulled away, but I didn't. Instead, I let my hand rest in his for a heartbeat longer than necessary. The warmth of his palm, the trembling restraint in the space between us, it all collided in a moment I knew we wouldn't undo. You're not invisible either, I said, and left the room. The hallway was dim again, lit only by the moonlight leaking through the high windows. My footsteps were soundless on the carpet, but my thoughts were deafening. Back in the guest room, I closed the door, leaned against it, and exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Nothing had happened, and yet everything had. The next morning, the generator had restored the power. The rain had passed, and the house looked exactly the same. But I wasn't. The next few days were quieter than usual. Claire returned from Charleston with the scent of hotel shampoo and faint cigarette smoke clinging to her coat. She didn't mention the storm or ask how the weekend had gone. Her only question was whether the dry cleaning had been picked up. Daniel, as expected, stayed out of sight. But something between us had shifted, subtle, unspoken, undeniable. I felt it in the pause of his footsteps when he passed the room I was in. In the way his gaze lingered a fraction too long when we crossed paths near the staircase. Nothing had been said, no promises made, but the air between us had become charged, like the atmosphere before lightning strikes. I told myself to forget it, to pretend that night in the study had never happened. I had crossed enough dangerous lines in my life to know how hard they were to uncross. But then came the Tuesday afternoon Claire left for her Pilates session. I was folding fresh towels on the landing upstairs when I heard a door creak behind me. Emily, Daniel said, his voice low and unsure. Do you have a minute? I turned, heart thumping, the memory of his touch flickering through me like a match relit. He stood barefoot in the hallway, sleeves rolled to his elbows, tie loosened. Uncharacteristically casual, unarmored. Of course, I said. We went into the study. He closed the door behind us this time. I need to say something, he began. And I don't expect a response. I just need it out of my head. I nodded, silent. I've been walking around this house like a ghost for so long, I forgot what it feels like to want something that doesn't suffocate me, he said. That night, your hand in mine, I felt alive for the first time in years. And that terrifies me. His confession wasn't grand. It was quiet, wounded, and that's what made it dangerous. Daniel, I began, but he shook his head gently. I know. You work here. This is wrong. It complicates everything. I swallowed hard. But I can't pretend I don't see you anymore. The silence that followed was louder than any words we could have said. I could feel the decision weighing on both of us. Dangerous, impossible, already halfway made. We didn't touch, didn't kiss, but something far more intimate passed between us. Honesty. That night, I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling fan's spinning shadows above me. I thought about the man in the study with the tired eyes. I thought about the woman who owned this house and how she wore her marriage like a trophy she never dusted. I thought about myself, the girl who swore she'd never fall into another mess she couldn't sweep clean. Too late. The next morning brought a strange calm. I arrived early, hoping the tasks would distract me. I was scrubbing the kitchen sink when I noticed something unusual, Claire's phone buzzing on the counter. She never left it behind. It was practically an appendage. Curiosity prickled, but I didn't touch it. Moments later, it lit up again. A message preview flashed across the screen. Missed last night already. Can't stop thinking about your skin. The name was saved as Michael. I froze. The words burned themselves into my memory before the screen dimmed. My heart thumped against my ribs like a warning drum. Michael? I didn't know who he was, but I knew what he was. I backed away, unsure if what I felt was shock or vindication. Claire's bitterness suddenly had a shape. Her sarcasm a root. She wasn't just cold, she was hiding something. Someone. I told myself it didn't matter. That her betrayal didn't justify anything I was feeling. But deep down, I knew the dynamic had changed. I wasn't the only one on the edge of a moral cliff. Later that evening, Daniel was in the garden trimming the hydrangeas when I approached. The late sun cast long golden shadows on the lawn, and he looked so out of place there, like a suit stuffed into a moment of peace. I saw a message on Claire's phone this morning, I said softly. His hands stilled. I didn't look. It just popped up. He turned slowly, his face unreadable. What did it say? I repeated it. He didn't speak for a while. Just stared at the petals in his palm like they held the answer to something ancient. I've suspected for a while, he said eventually. But I never had proof. Never wanted it, honestly. I watched his shoulders sag, a man shedding years of denial in a single breath. I'm sorry, I said. And I meant it. He looked at me, the sorrow in his eyes so vast it swallowed the fading sunlight. No, Emily. I'm sorry. That you're here. That you're seeing all this. That I brought you into it. You didn't bring me, I whispered. I walked in. The words hung between us, fragile and final. I didn't know what would happen next, whether this would burn us both or set us free. But I knew one thing. The moment for restraint was dissolving. He stepped toward me, slowly, hesitantly. The distance closed in small, deliberate inches. And when he reached me, he didn't kiss me. He pressed his forehead to mine. A single breath shared. A fragile, sacred pause. And then the front door slammed. We jerked apart. Claire's voice echoed through the entryway. Daniel? I forgot my gym bag. Panic fluttered in my chest. He stepped back, cleared his throat, and walked away calmly, calling out, In the garden. I stood frozen, hands clenched, heart rattling like a train off its tracks. We hadn't done anything. And yet, it felt like we'd done everything.